Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and good to see you all here. So before the Zazen session of 30 minutes, there was on the screen and through the speakers chanting from Plum village in France, Thich Nhat Hanh's center. The monks and nuns there were chanting Namo'valokiteshvaraya over and over again, repetitively. The nature of chanting is that it's often repetitive. And several people have commented to me that they find that comforting, that chant that precedes meditation each week. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that chant, Namo'valokiteshvaraya. I'm not sure the particular arrangement of that, I think is novel. It's something that probably the folks at Plum Village worked out. The Namo'valokiteshvaraya, however, is ancient. Namo coming from the same root, the same origin as namaste. And if you've taken yoga classes, you know that that's kind of a respectful greeting, an honorific namaste, which is widely used in India. And Namo is sort of a short form of that in Sanskrit. The Avaloketishvara is a modification of Avaloketishvara. And it's modified, I think, in order to fit the rhythm of the chant better. Sort of compress a couple syllables and make it easier to chant and more melodic. Avaloketishvara, who is Avaloketishvara? What is his or her origin, and why do we pay attention to it? The name Avaloketishvara is from Sanskrit, and the origin of the name, the etymology of the name, is debated, and there are two main theories. Because in the oldest Sanskrit texts that we have available to us, the name is spelled slightly two different ways. It gives rise to two different theories of etymology. To sort of quickly summarize this, it can either be something along the lines of the Lord who looks down, or he or she who hears the cries of the world. When Avalokiteshvara is taken in scriptural context, the second derivation makes a lot more sense. So some variation of he or she who hears the cries of the world. And the most prominent description of Avaloketishvara appears in the Lotus Sutra. And we'll be talking more about the Lotus Sutra in the fall, I think. It's a foundational Mahayana Buddhist text that heavily influenced the Zen tradition, certainly. But in the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, there's a relatively lengthy description of the powers and the manifestations of Avaloketishvara. And fortunately for us, there is now a complete translation of the Lotus Sutra by a scholar, Jean Reeves. Jean Reeves. Does it look backwards? Okay, no, okay, it looks okay. Jean Reeves, which is very readable and we'll be referring to. But he translates Avaloketishvara as regarder of the cries of the world, regarder of the cries of the world. So, interestingly, originally in India, Avaloketishvara was depicted in art as male, as a male figure. But as Buddhism spread to China, possibly because Chinese is a gender-neutral language, it doesn't really have gender pronouns as I understand it. You have to surmise the gender from the context. But in any case, in China, in artwork, Avaloketishvara is often depicted as female or androgynous. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why we pay attention to Avaloketishvara. What is all this about? I mean, is it just a fairy tale, an entertainment for the mind? Why are these monks and nuns so earnest-looking and devotional as they chant Namo'valokiteshvaraya? I'd like to read a little bit from the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is fantastical. It is quite clearly a work of the imagination, for the imagination. Keeping in mind that imagination, yes, can be used for entertainment, but it can also be used for guidance. It can also be used to help us navigate life. It's a critical part of human consciousness. It's what perhaps separates us from AI. So I'll just read this, a couple selections. The first has to do with the powers of Avaloketishvara. And this chapter begins, as many of them do, where someone is asking the Buddha a question and the Buddha is responding. At that time, the bodhisattva inexhaustible mind, that was his name, inexhaustible mind, got up from his seat, bared his right shoulder, put his palms together facing the Buddha, and said, "World-honored one, for what reason does the bodhisattva, regarder of the cries of the world, have the name regarder of the cries of the world?" The Buddha answered inexhaustible mind bodhisattva as follows: "Good son, if there were countless hundreds of thousands of billions of living beings experiencing suffering and agony who heard of this regarder of the cries of the world bodhisattva and wholeheartedly called his name, regarder of the cries of the world bodhisattva would immediately hear their cries, and all of them would be freed. If anyone who embraces the name of regarder of the cries of the world bodhisattva falls into a great fire, the fire will not burn that person due to the divine authority and power of that bodhisattva. If anyone, carried away by a flood, calls his name, that person will immediately reach some shallows. If there are hundreds of thousands of billions of beings who, in search of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, seashell, agate, coral, amber, pearls, and other treasures, go out to sea and have their ships blown off course by a fierce wind to the land of the ogre demons, and if among them there is even a single person who calls the name of regarder of the cries of the world bodhisattva, all those people will be saved from difficulties caused by the ogres. That is why the bodhisattva is named regarder of the cries of the world." And then the passage goes on for a couple pages in that manner, talking about all of the disasters for which calling the name of regarder of the cries of the world will result in some sort of salvation. The second part of this chapter goes into the manifestations of Avaloketishvara. And I'll read just a selection from that part. For those who need someone in the body of an elder in order to be saved, he appears as an elder and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of an ordinary citizen in order to be saved, he appears as an ordinary citizen and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of a high official in order to be saved, he appears as a high official and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need somebody in the body of a Brahmin in order to be saved, he appears as a Brahmin and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of a monk, a nun, layman, or laywoman in order to be saved, he appears as a monk, nun, layman, or laywoman and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of the wife of an elder, ordinary citizen, high official, or Brahmin in order to be saved, he appears as a wife and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of a boy or girl in order to be saved, he appears as a boy or girl and teaches the Dharma for them. For those who need someone in the body of a heavenly being, dragon, satyr, centaur, asura, griffin, chimera, python, human, or non-human in order to be saved, he appears in such a body and teaches the Dharma for them. So from that, I think you'll appreciate the fantastical style of the Lotus Sutra. But how do we make sense of this? Those of us who have not grown up with these images and stories of Avaloketishvara, or as he or she is called in Japan, Kannon, or in China, Kuan Yin. Those who grew up in those cultures would be very familiar with this and would perhaps know better how to understand it or take it. But how do we make sense of it? Well, I think, one way is to view the whole thing disparagingly and say, well, that sounds like just an imaginary friend. It sounds like okay, if I can't pay my rent or I get a cancer diagnosis, I can just call on this imaginary friend to solve the problem, to pay my rent or to cure my cancer. And the people writing and listening to this must have been childlike in their mentality. That's one way of looking at it. But I find that highly doubtful. This text and these stories have persisted over many centuries. And they've been a comfort and an aid to people who perhaps have experienced much greater adversity than we. Back at the time that these were written, people didn't live very long. There were a lot of hazards and threats. And such things as fires and floods and famines and pestilence were much more tangible threats than they are now. Even now, of course, we know that these things are threatening and perhaps increasingly threatening, but most of us live in relative safety and comfort. The people who listen to these verses, I don't think were naive and childlike. But I think they knew how to take them. I think they knew that bringing Avaloketishvara to mind could be helpful in a wide variety of adverse circumstances, a wide variety of disastrous events. And use these teachings to help them survive and navigate the world and be the kind of people they wanted to be. It could be looked at that Avaloketishvara is a personification of human kindness. That in addition to physical presence, there can be spiritual presence, that Avaloketishvara can actually be present when called upon and is always available in oneself and in others. It can be viewed as a composite of all the kindness that we have received or offered in our lifetimes. A reminder of that ever-present compassion that we can call upon, and that appears to us at odd times when we need it. So we could say that Avalokiteshvara is just a character in a story, but I guess I would object to the word just. I think we're all involved in stories as we navigate life. Stories give us meaning. We have some sort of story that we're enacting when we play our various roles in the family or in the workplace or in the neighborhood. But not all stories are equally beneficial. And some stories are just, frankly, harmful. So whether having Avalokiteshvara as a character in your story is measured by the effects in your life, in your daily life. So one can choose to adopt that character or some similar character. There are many similar characters in other traditions. Helpers, personifications of compassion. And that is the role that Avalokiteshvara plays. So are you going to see Avalokiteshvara walk into a room? Well, I would say you might, but you just don't know what form he or she will take, or when he or she will arrive. But curiously enough, she often arrives when you need her. So be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for Avalokiteshvara. I think I'll stop there. As I mentioned, we'll be talking a little bit more about the Lotus Sutra. This is kind of an inoculation because it is a fantastical text, but it's one that has had profound effect in the Buddhist world, and one that I think we can gain benefit from studying. So, what does all this mean to you? Is it helpful, or is it? I think different people respond to these stories and these characters in different ways. How does it strike you? Who's been an Avalokiteshvara for you? Or perhaps, who have you been an Avalokiteshvara for? We'll stop there, and we'll go into breakout rooms. Thank you very much for listening today.